Thanks, Betty. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're very excited to have you here with us. I'm Mifrah, and I'm the Azure Specialist who is a part of your broader account team at Microsoft. I work alongside Sandy, who you might have met already. At Microsoft, we want our customers to be proactive when it comes to security. And recently, for the past year, ransomware attacks have been an increasing threat to organizations across Canada and also globally. That is why at Microsoft, we invest over $20 billion on research and development to secure your organization and also enable you to transform digitally without compromising your productivity. Today, you are in very good hands with Today, you're in very good hands with ProServeIT, but please do reach out to me and we can discuss Microsoft funding, programs, and also training that can support a proof of concept or pilot project. And with that, I will pass it on to George. I hope you enjoy today's event.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Azure Sentinel session for the Cybersecurity Lunch and Learn event. My name is George Abou-Samra, and I'm a Principal Consultant and Security Community Lead here at ProServeIT. During today's session, we'll be talking about Azure Sentinel, which is a security product that is part of Microsoft's arsenal of security products. To start, we will talk about some of the challenges organizations are having when dealing with security. Then, we'll be giving you a brief overview of Azure Sentinel, especially for those of you that are not familiar with the product. We will then provide you with a quick demo of how Azure Sentinel can help protect your organization from bad actors. And finally, we will go through a Q&A session to answer any questions that you might have. All right, so today, organizations are faced with an incredible difficult task of trying to protect their expanding digital estate from increasing cyber threats. Now, the move to the cloud and a more mobile workforce, especially now during COVID, has pushed the border of your state beyond the boundary of your physical network. Your data, your users, and your systems are everywhere today. Now, the security operations purpose of protecting an organization's information and assets is becoming increasingly difficult. Some of those reasons are shown here on the screen. One of which is that attack techniques, their frequency and complexity are evolving extremely fast. A typical attack can span different parts and cross various resource types. It might start from an email address, you get phished, for example, proceed to an endpoint, spread across a cloud service or to a database. It can involve multiple user accounts, multiple systems, and so on. Another challenge worth noting is that security teams are under strain from the expanding range of defensive technologies and not knowing what security tools they need, and as hybrid cloud adoption increases. This can cause alert fatigue, where we see too many alerts from disconnected products, and you kind of need a way to reduce that noise. You have to prioritize your alerts and enable investigation and hunting across your entire data set. Breach investigations are complex and time-consuming as well. When it comes to breach investigation, every second counts, especially when security personnel are handling a threat that might jeopardize the organization. The clock is ticking fast, but investigation requires highly skilled security analysts and can often take days, even sometimes weeks. And to add to that, the shortage of security talents makes this problem even worse. So the need for skilled security professionals has greatly increased, and supply cannot meet current or future demand. Now, these are just some of the challenges that organizations face today when dealing with security. So what is Azure Sentinel? Azure Sentinel is a scalable, cloud-native SIEM, or Security Information and Event Management, and SOAR, which stands for Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response solution. Now, the SIEM component of Azure Sentinel allows us to analyze events and data in real time for an early detection of targeted attacks and data breaches. And it also allows us to collect and store and investigate the log data that we're ingesting for incident response, forensics, and regulatory compliance as well. The SOAR component of Azure Sentinel helps teams make the jump from just simply collecting security-related data to streamlining security operations by using playbooks and automating many of the tasks required to respond to security events today. Now, like I stated earlier, Azure Sentinel works by correlating these security logs and signals from all sources across your applications, your services, your infrastructure, your network, your users, regardless of where they are, whether they're on premises, in Azure, or any other cloud platform today, and alert us whenever anomalies in events are detected. This end-to-end solution for security operations can be broken down to four main phases. The first phase is collect. You want to be able to collect logs and data from various sources, such as your Microsoft 365 environment, your Azure, your servers, your workstations, your firewalls, your users, so on and so forth. So you want to make sure that you capture as much information as possible in order to correlate those logs together to try and find threats in your environment. As of today, there are over 116 different connectors and growing. So regardless of what your product is, if you're using a Microsoft native product like Microsoft 365, within a couple of clicks, you're starting to ingest your logs into Azure Sentinel. While other third-party connectors might require some additional configuration to be done, especially firewalls where you might need some sort of log collector in your environment. But regardless, any type of application or server or service that has some sort of logs, there will be one way or another for us to ingest the logs into Azure Sentinel. Now, after we ingest all the logs that we need, the next phase would be to detect. We want to be able to detect security incidents with the analytic rules that we create. For example, I want to generate an alert whenever somebody successfully signs into my account from anywhere outside of Canada. We would have to create an analytic rule for that, and then it would generate an incident to let me know that someone did attempt to sign into my account from outside of Canada. It was successful. So let's go in and start our investigation process, which is the third phase. Now, we want to be able to investigate the alert and find the root cause in a short period of time. And Sentinel can help us identify that fairly quickly as well. We want to understand the scope of the incident and to be able to find the root cause of this potential security threat. And finally, we want to be able to respond. So we want to respond as quickly as possible to eliminate these threats and using automation whenever possible. So in this case, in Azure Sentinel's language, we will be using playbooks, which are built on logic apps. And we'll get to see all this throughout our demo today. Now, when we talk security, we look to take advantage of security analytics, which is the process of using data collection and analysis tools to monitor and detect threats. That can be broken down to 5 different types of data analytics. The first one being descriptive analysis, which answers the question, what happened? We want to be able to look at comprehensive, accurate, and most importantly, live data. We want to monitor the status of our machines, our devices, products, and assets, and assess if things are going according to plan. And if they're not going according to plan, we want to alert people when those anomalies arise. Next is the diagnostic analysis, which answers the question, why did it happen? We want to be able to examine the data from multiple angles to understand why something is happening. The goal here is to find the root cause of a problem in order to fix or improve something. And that something could be a process, a service, a product, so on and so forth. Then we have predictive analysis, which answers the question, what could happen? We want to be able to calculate the probability that something will happen within a specific time frame, just based on historical data that we are collecting. The next one would be proactive analysis, which answers the question, can it be prevented? Now, can a threat really be avoided before it happens? In order to do that, it is imperative to locate and correct any potential vulnerabilities before they can be exploited by cyber criminals. And finally, prescriptive analysis, which answers the question, what should be done? This is a set of recommended actions as a result of a diagnosis or a prediction. Now, this breakdown of the types of security analytics can help us understand how Azure Sentinel can answer all those questions by having a proactive approach to security in the organization. Let's do a quick demo of Azure Sentinel to show you the various components and what the product is all about. So this is the overview page of Azure Sentinel. Over here, we have some very basic information or general information about what we're going to see within these tabs that we have here. So if we take a look at this top bar over here, over the last 30 days, Azure Sentinel has collected over 4.5 million events from all our data sources. It has generated over 6,600 alerts, which is about 1,000 more than the previous 30 days, which eventually generated 7,000 or so incidents within our product. And over here, we can take a look at the amount of data being ingested from our various sources. So each one of these are color coded depending on what the data source is. Uh, here, W3C IIS log, this really means logs from an IIS server being generated. So 1.7 million events have been registered within Sentinel over the past 30 days just from IIS. Our threat intelligence platform, which feeds us information about what IPs and what domains and what host names have been malicious or are malicious out there in the wild. If any of those IPs or host names or domains are ever witnessed in our environment, we will be alerted by them. Office activity related to Office 365, Exchange Online, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, and other data sources that we have connected as well. We will dig deep into those throughout this demo. We also have a little box over here that gives us the recent incidents. So the most recent incidents that we have seen within our environment. Data source anomalies. So basically here, it detects anomalies within the data sources that we are ingesting. So for example, if based on this table called event, there are specific events happening here, and this is kind of the threshold, but suddenly on September 19th, it jumped up all the way here. So that is an anomaly based on the data that we are ingesting. So it's just, take an extra set of eyes, take a look at what's happening here, and just to validate that there's nothing malicious happening within this data table or data set. And finally down here, depending on the logs that we are ingesting, IIS in this case would populate this, firewall logs would populate this. It takes a look at your inbound and outbound connections from those various sources, and it lets you know where are the potential malicious events happening from. And we can see over here happening from the States and happening from China as well. So it's just a matter of digging deeper into the event, clicking on this, and then looking through the raw logs to figure out what's happening from these countries. So this is the overview page. Now, like I said earlier, the very first thing you want to do is you want to figure out what data connectors you want to ingest. So we have 116 connectors today, and they're growing. So a lot of them are third-party products, Amazon Web Services, Palo Alto Firewall, Azure Firewall, Barracuda. There's also a lot of built-in connectors, so Microsoft native connectors like Office 365, Defender for Office 365, Defender for Identity, so on and so forth. Now, if your product is not in this list, that's okay. There will be other methods for us to ingest these logs. It doesn't necessarily have to be one of the connectors in this case. We can ingest custom logs from your servers, from your infrastructure, from your applications. So, once we get to that stage, we'll have to figure out our game plan moving forward. So if I want to connect Office 365, for example, just because it is a Microsoft native product, it's a little bit easier to connect than the other tools or other data sets. So it's as simple as clicking on the Open Connector page, making sure that we meet the prerequisites here. As long as we meet these, just a couple of checkboxes, clicking Apply Changes, and then we can see data starting to being ingested into our logs, our log analytics workspace. So this is just for Office 365. And as a next step, you can generate queries to take a look at these logs and these activities that are happening within your environment and take a look at them in raw log format. Let's see what that looks like. So now that I've ingested over 10 connectors in this case, let's take a look at the raw logs and how they are present to us in this product. So once this loads, let's take a look at sign-in logs. Let's take 10 just to make things a bit quicker. All right, so these are the 10 logs of sign-in activities happening in our environment. And they're all result type 0, meaning that they are all successful sign-ins. And we can expand each one of those to see what they actually mean. So for this person, her name is Sandra Lopez, signed in from Canada using her Windows device. Uh, mobile apps and desktop clients was used. There was no conditional access policy applied to this one. This is the IP address that they signed in from. These are the location details, Oakville, Canada, Ontario, the geo coordinates, the latitude and longitude, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of information that comes just from a regular sign-in log. So now that we know that result type equals 0 means it's successful, I want to write a query where result type does not equal 0 to get the ones that have not passed their authentication. So these logs, and you can see here, 50058, 50074, so on and so forth, these are unsuccessful sign-ins. Let's take a good example here. This one, for example, this user did not pass the MFA challenge. So Claudia signed in successfully from Canada, and we can see all the information here, Newmarket, Ontario, so on and so forth. But it was a successful sign-in, but the user did not satisfy the MFA challenge on their device. So for that, it generated a 50074 result type, and this user was not signed into the environment. But looking at raw logs like this might be beneficial for security analysts to try and identify what happened and how it happened, but it's not really beneficial to the Sentinel product for it to create alerts for us. And that's where these analytics come in. So from the analytics perspective, we would create that query, similar to the query that I just wrote there, and it would let us know whenever an anomaly happens or whenever this event happens. And we can create up to 512 rules, active rules in our environment. We have a lot of rule templates that we can use just out of the box, developed by Microsoft. So it's just as easy as selecting a specific rule. Let's take this one, for example, which requires IIS as one of the data sources. And it's as simple as clicking Create Rule. Everything will come pre-populated for us. We just have to make minor tweaks according to what we want out of this rule. If we want the severity not to be a high, we can change it. We want to change the tactic rather than it being persistence and privilege escalation. Maybe this is a pre-attack or initial access. You can set the rule logic. So this is a KQL query or a Kusto query. That's the language that Sentinel uses or Log Analytics uses. And it's basically looking at the IIS log and filtering based on all these different variables or different properties. And it's going to project the time generated, the IP, the host name, the computer that generated this alert, and the username that generated this alert as well. We can mess around with the incident settings as well. If we want to group the alerts, if there's multiple alerts of the same type, we can group them so that we just generate one incident rather than multiple. We can even apply an automated response using a playbook. So for example, if I know for a fact that this user is compromised whenever this alert is generated, 100% compromised user, I can run a playbook that would automatically reset that user's password, block their account, revoke their access, regardless of where they are, whether they're on an on-premises domain with an Active Directory and domain controller, or whether they're using Azure AD and all their entities are cloud only. Depending on where they reside, we'd have to run a different playbook. But eventually, this is how we automate a response, is using playbooks. And finally, once we review everything that we want to do, everything checks out, we can click create, and then this rule will get created in our environment, and we will get alerts anytime this query is triggered. So we want to create these alerts to try and identify threats in our environment. We'll use the built-in ones from Microsoft, and we'll also have to custom build analytic rules just based on your environment, based on whatever we are ingesting. Now that we have these analytic rules, whenever any one of these is triggered, it is going to generate an incident. And as security analysts, they need as much information as possible in order to identify what this threat is and where it came from. So, and it will also to help them with the investigation process. So if I was to take one of these alerts, just as an example, multiple failed login attempts. So here I can see in the description, the user Corey performed more than 87 failed login attempts in a single session. Now this can mean, a user has their password hard coded somewhere. Maybe it's a script running. Maybe it's a brute force attack that's been going on. We would have to investigate to figure out what's going on there. If we take a look at another one, attempt to bypass conditional access rules. So somebody wanted to sign in, but we have conditional access policies that denies them from signing in based on certain criteria. So if you want to investigate this further, we can click on View Full Details, which will give us the alert, the timeline. So if this was tagged with multiple alerts, we would see all the alerts together with the timeline, what happened first, what happened second, third, so on and so forth. This is the alert. There are 2 events according to this alert. The entities involved are Peter and this person, and there's no comments for now because this is a brand new alert. Now, if I want to investigate this alert, just click on the investigate button, and it'll take us to this investigation view. Now, depending on how many alerts this has been generated, maybe there are multiple alerts correlated to the same threat. So maybe, this person received an email and it was a phishing email. They clicked on the link. That email downloaded something to their device. It ran a script, started the ransomware process. We're going to see a whole lot of these alerts happening at the same time. So just because this is a demo, I can just highlight this user, and they have 33 related alerts tied to their account. So if I select that, it's going to expand all the alerts tied to Peter's account. So a lot of attempt to bypass conditional access policies. There's SharePoint file operations happening. Maybe some of them are suspicious. But it's up to us to do this investigation and figure out what had happened and why are we seeing all these alerts from Peter's account. Same thing with this user. We can highlight their name and figure out alerts that are tied to their account as well. And then it would expand that view to help us investigate what alerts are they tied together. Did it start from an email? Did it end up somewhere else? And you can see here there are over 71 attempts to bypass conditional access policies, but they had failed. And this alert is tied to these 2 users at the same time. So if I want to take a look at the timeline view, it'll give me all these alerts in the timeline, so I can figure out what happened first, next, so on and so forth, and then I can figure out the chain of events that happened, find more information. So the entities involved in this case are Peter and this user, and all these alerts are the entities. If we had an IP initiated as part of this investigation, we would have the IP address as an entity. If there's servers or workstations, those will also be part of the entity. If it was a ransomware or a virus or something malicious, a file, we would have the file hash listed here as well, alongside with more information about the file. So this would help us with our investigation to figure out what happened and how we're going to make sense out of this. And if we were to determine that, Peter was compromised, then we would easily just go back here, go to View Playbooks, and run the playbook that says compromised account, which would then reset this user's password, block their account, revoke their access, so on and so forth. Now, I'm not going to run it on this account just because this is a real person, but let me just show you what a playbook looks like. What is an automation response, or what does an automation response look like? So playbooks are built on Azure Logic Apps. If you've used Logic Apps to automate something in the past, it's the exact same process. Instead, this is within the Azure Sentinel environment. So this tells us whenever a response to an Azure Sentinel alert is triggered, I want us to get the incident information, get the accounts involved, so in this case, Peter and that other user, go through all this variable creation and JSON API calls, and at the end, it's going to create a temporary password for me, revoke their access in Azure AD, block their account in Azure AD, and reset their password, and finally send me an email with all this information. So we'll go through this in one of our demo in just a bit, but this is technically what a playbook looks like. We can do whatever we want with playbooks. There's a lot of built-in third-party actions that we can take. So it's not really just tied to the Microsoft stack. It's tied to Microsoft alongside a lot of third-party applications as well. So just to expand that to show you what it looks like, if you're using Amazon, there's something within Amazon that you can do. There's Salesforce, there's what is that called? There's a lot of applications that you can use here, so it's just a matter of depending on what you have, there might be a connector built in. Otherwise, we can create, if it supports API calls, we can definitely use the HTTP function to call on an API. So once we investigate an incident, we figure out what's going on, we can also take a look at the events. So this would help the security analyst find out what's actually happening by looking at the raw logs if needed be. So they can take a look at the IPs that these actions have been initiated from, the user accounts, and whatever information that we had created within this query. So once the information populates, I'll be able to show you what that looks like. There it is. So these are the conditional access policies that they are talking about, that they're saying that they try to avoid. They sign in from mobile Safari, from an iOS device within Canada. These are the two IP addresses witnessed accessing this environment, and these are the conditional access policy names that they try to avoid, by signing into our environment. So as a security analyst, we should be able to come in here and take a look at what these policies look like, who the users are, the timelines, what IPs, so on and so forth. Next, we also have workbooks, which is a visual representation of the queries that we are writing. So from an executive perspective, they might want to see, a workbook that answers the question, am I safe? Am I under attack? So with that, we can create visuals to help these executives take a look at what's happening within their environment and whether they're safe, whether they're constantly under attack, where people are signing in from in their environment, so on and so forth. So in this case, everything here, by the way, within these graphs and charts and pictures are the underlying technology is the KQL query. So everything here is written using that language. It's just represented in a visual format. So in this case, I can mess around with the time range. So the last 30 days, I've had 7,000 alerts, 934 high, 2,800 medium, and 3,200 low, 178 informational. And I can also populate a map view to show me where people are signing in from. So the larger this circle, the more people are signing in from this location. So from a successful login locations, we can see that a lot of people are signing in from within Canada. There's a lot of people also signing in from, so 2 from the Netherlands, 81 from France, United States, Vietnam, India, so on and so forth. So it's just practically the locations that we're allowing people to sign in from. And here we can see the failed login locations to see where are people attempting to sign into our environment, but they are failing. So, we don't have anybody working out of Brazil, so we shouldn't have 174 failed logins from Brazil. That's possibly an attack against some of our users. 169 from Thailand. We also don't have people from Thailand. So that's just something for us to look into and investigate who's signing in from those countries and why are they attempting to sign in. Which accounts are also attempting to sign into. So that way we can add an extra layer of protection to those accounts to make sure that they are protected at all costs. We can even take a look at other different types of graphs. Maybe we want to take a look at the SOC efficiency. How well is our SOC doing? How many alerts we're getting per day? How many incidents created by an owner? How many are unassigned? How many are assigned to a specific user? Incidents by status. And just because this is a demo environment, we're not going to have all this information populated, but how long it's taking us to triage this incident, to changing the status from new to active and starting the investigation process, and how long it's taking us to close these specific tickets. And here we have a time brush, so we can select a specific range if we need to, and have it update this information based on that specific range. Maybe you want to do an audit to a specific incident to see what had happened. Has it been closed? What are the notes? What are the comments? And in this case here, we can see the most recent alerts, the top 250, with all the information populated in here as well. So if I want to see, like, for example, this alert, 38299, I just populate that value here. And then it'll give me this specific incident, more information about the incident, and how long it took us to triage it, how long it took us to close it. And finally, some billing information that you can use to see how much it's costing you to ingest these logs into Sentinel, and how much it's costing you to store these logs in Sentinel. So you can see here, I'm only ingesting logs for 3 months. I'm not adjusting them for any longer. This is a demo environment. And in my demo environment with those 10 data sources, I'm practically paying, $3, $4, $15. It's because we added a little more sources in September, so it's going to cost us a little more. But really, the more logs you ingest, the more it's going to cost you. Some logs are free to ingest, while others are not free to ingest. Depending on where your data center is, whether it's Canada Central, East US, West US, doesn't really matter, but each one of those data centers would have a different cost associated to it. So we just have to make sure that we take that in consideration once we decide where our Sentinel is going to sit. We can see the amount of data being ingested by the solution over the last month. So they're color coded here, so we can see the amount of logs being ingested. This is by data type. So we can customize these logs based on, or these graphics, depending on what we need. All right, we also have a lot of built-in templates that we can use. So if I want to take a look at the Office 365 workbook, this comes custom, or it comes built in with Azure Sentinel. You don't have to code or write anything to get this going. But basically, over the last 90 days, I want to take a look at all my workloads, Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, and all user activities. Whether someone deleted something, they updated something, they shared something, all that will be present to us in these graphical charts and graphical formats so that we can see them easily, especially from an executive level. Now, let's move on to our threat intelligence. Now, we've signed up to a few threat intelligence platforms which feed us information about what is malicious and what is not malicious. So for example, if this IP is ever witnessed within our logs, it is going to generate an alert because according to IBM, this is a malicious IP. So if someone is signing in from this IP address, attacking us from this IP, whatever the action is, if this IP address is ever witnessed in our logs, it's going to generate an alert. Same thing with this URL. So this says doesmeplus.com, and they're trying to domain squad against disneyplus.com. So they're trying just to fool us to think that this is actually disneyplus.com. And if this host name is or URL is ever present in any of our logs, whether it came via email, someone clicked on it, someone accessed it, it would generate an alert so that we would know that this is a malicious domain. Let's take action based on whatever the user did. Right. So we have a lot of threat intelligence platforms that feed into here. Just based on the logs that we get, it would generate the alert. Now let's take a look at a live demo. Now let's just say here, this alert that was generated contains an IP address as part of its entities. So in this case, login from malicious IP. And you can see here, this is the entity, there's an IP address. Now, just off the bat, I want to know if this IP address is malicious or not. In order to do that, we've created a playbook that connects to multiple services, and then it would write a comment for us that tells us whether this IP has been, is malicious or not. All right, so we can see here that there's no comments. There's nothing here. I want to run a playbook that would take that IP and then add a comment and tells me whether this IP is actually malicious or not. And for that, I'm going to use two services. The first one is abused IPDB, and the second one is VirusTotal. So if I run these two playbooks, back to the incident, go to the comments and refresh. And you can see within a couple of seconds, I already have this information present for me so that I can make an informed decision to see whether this IP is actually malicious or not. And in this case, according to VirusTotal, it checked 85 different sources and none of them came back malicious. So they're all harmless. And if we checked abused IPDB, it also gave me a little more information about this IP address. It is a public IP address, version 4, abuse confidence score 0, meaning that it has never been reported in the past as being malicious. It is a Rogers, the ISP is Rogers. So to me, this is not a malicious IP address. I just have to investigate the events further to figure out what this user did, and then I can make that decision whether it is malicious or it's not malicious. Now, if we take this other alert, we can see here the entity involved is a user. It's not an IP. And if we take a look at this user, just to refresh, it's called Sentinel Demo User. And you can see here, block sign in is a no. So I'm allowed to sign in with this user, no problem whatsoever. Now let's say I did this, this user is malicious, or this alert is malicious. I've confirmed for a fact that this user has been compromised. I want to make sure that I can automate the response as quickly as possible to minimize the time the attacker is in the environment. So for that, I'm going to run a playbook. And this time I'm going to run the compromised user playbook. Run. Now we're going to see here, we can take a look at the run history. And we can even drill down within the run history to see at what step is it on and did it complete successfully. So in this case, at 12:41 p.m., it took 5.77 seconds to remediate this account. So this is way quicker than actually logging into the portal, searching for the user, resetting their password, blocking their account, revoking their access. Within a click of a button, it ran through my entire playbook. And it is a very long playbook within 5 seconds. And revoked their sessions, it blocked the user, reset their password, and it sent me an email. Now, if I was to go back to this user account, If I refresh, this is going to become a yes. There it is. So the user was blocked. I'm not allowed to sign into this user anymore. The same set of actions can be run against your on-prem domain. So if you don't have just cloud users, they are synced from your Active Directory. We can run a similar script on-prem to block the user on-prem and sync those changes to Azure AD as quickly as possible as well. And finally, I received this email. So we're able to customize this to our liking. So this is in an HTML format. I'm not sure why it's not showing it properly here, but it is here. So we can put visuals, and here it says this user was involved as part of a security incident. As part of the remediation process, the user's sign-in sessions have been revoked, account has been blocked, and the password was reset. The user will need to re-authenticate to all the applications. And this is the temporary password that we would have to share with this user. So now if I want to sign into this user account, I would have to use that new temporary password. And then I would have to change my password upon signing in so that I can generate a new password for me without having to bug the administrators. So in this case, it's Sentinel demo at ericsugar.onmicrosoft.com. This is the password. I think there might be an extra space at the end. Oh, and it says your account has been locked. So you'd have to unlock your account first in order to sign in and change your password. So this is one of the ways that we can mitigate an attack fairly quickly. There it is. I'd have to type in my new password here, and then this user will be able to sign in with the threat mitigated. All right, and all that is done through our playbooks. Now, the way Sentinel works is it sits on something called a log analytics workspace. It's just a workspace that collects logs from various sources, and Sentinel happens to be one of those sources. So depending on how many logs you ingest per day, there might be a discount that can apply to your environment. Otherwise, you are charged based on the data center that you have your Sentinel instance and your log analytics instance hosted. So for Canada Central, for example, it's $3 and change per gigabyte ingested into Sentinel and as well into Log Analytics Workspace. It differs between a few cents here and there. And basically, if you ingest more than 5 terabytes per day, 2 terabytes per day, 100 gigs per day, then you qualify for certain discounts on how much you ingest. To add to that, we can also configure a cap of how much data we want it to ingest per day, a daily cap. So we don't recommend daily caps unless you have a specific budget that you want to fit your data with. So with that said, you can say I want to ingest only 1 gig per day. I just want to pay $3 and change per day, and that's about it. Otherwise, no daily cap. The problem with having a daily cap is you will lose security logs. So they will not be ingested once you hit a specific, whatever cap you've set. If there's an attack happening, you will unfortunately not be able to log that data, so you won't be able to investigate that. But there are a lot of ways for us to kind of estimate how much our logs are going to cost us in the long run if we decide to host these logs in our environment. Now, I did tell you that they were $3 and change, but that seemed to have changed. So again, depending on your data center, it could change. Now it's $2.76 per gigabyte ingested. And from a logs analytics workspace perspective, you get 5 gigs per month free of ingestion, and then you start charging after the 5 gigs. Now, based on retention, we get 90 days worth of retention for free. So you can store your logs for 3 months in Sentinel for free. If you need those logs to be retained longer than 90 days, we can store them in Sentinel or in the Log Analytics workspace for up to 2 years. So we can change this bar here to 730 days. If you need it longer than 2 years, we can export that information to Event Hub or to a storage blob in Azure, and then save that data. In an event, we need to go back to it and look into it. But just depending on your regulatory compliance, if you have to have to abide by any type of compliance policies, at least we have that option there, and we can extend that to up to 2 years, even further if necessary as well. So that is an overview of Azure Sentinel. We talked about the data connectors, creating analytics, having the analytics create incidents, having visuals in workbooks for the executive team, and the threat intelligence platform that feeds us information about what IPs are malicious, what domains are malicious, what host names are malicious, and finally, how to automate an attack before any damage is done and to minimize the amount of time the hacker has within the environment. Let's move back to our PowerPoint deck. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind is that anybody could be a victim of cybercrime. It's a matter of when they get hit and not if they get hit. And we're seeing a lot of both targeted and non-targeted attacks as well. So it doesn't matter what your business is or how many employees you have. If you have an exposed vulnerability, it will be used and abused. Now, ProServeIT has an offering that is built around Azure Sentinel. It's called Alarm Guardian. And you can think about this offering as getting security for your home, but instead of protecting your home, we'll be protecting your IT environment, your Office 365, your Azure, your servers, your workstations, your firewalls, your third-party cloud providers, whether it's Amazon Web Services or if it's Google Cloud. So regardless of what application, what server, what service you're using, if that contains logs somewhere, we will be able to ingest it one way or another into Sentinel. And there are different tiers that you can choose from just based on your organization and your needs. So if you're interested in exploring this offer further, reach out to us at cloud@proserveit.com and mention this webinar so that we can initiate our Azure Sentinel discussions and go through this together. Now, what we usually do throughout our time together is we'll go through a scoping call to help identify the data sources that you want to include. We'll go through price estimates to tell you what data sources are free to ingest, what other sources would cost you, and how much they would cost you based on the sources that you have. We would set up a brand new Azure subscription, preferably via CSP, so that we can deploy everything remotely and through automation as well. We'll deploy the log analytics and Azure Sentinel for you, connect the various data sources that you want to ingest, create the analytic rules, whether they're built in or custom to your environment, create workbooks for visual representation of these threats for your executives and for the security analyst team as well. And finally, create playbooks for automating security responses and notifications. Currently, these are the 3 tiers that we have. Now, depending on how complex your environment is, we'll have these multiple packages that could fit your need. So once we have that conversation together, we can figure out where you fit best and put you under that tier. Just reach out to us at cloud@proserveit.com and we'll be glad to help you out. And now time for some Q&A. Any questions?
Hi, George. We did receive some questions in the chat. Thanks for the great presentation.
Perfect.
Questions from Mike. You may have touched on some of this. First of all, how long are logs kept?
So logs by default are kept for 3 months or 90 days, and that's what you get for free. If you want to ingest logs even further than that, depending on your data center, wherever you have it configured, that's where it would either be maybe 15 cents per gigabyte per month or 12 cents. It just depends on the data center that you have set it up once you initially configured Sentinel in the workspace.
Okay, he has 2 more questions.
Sure.
From a license usage perspective, how much control is there over the logs that are sent via a given connector?
Can you repeat that one more time, please? So from a license perspective.
How much control is there over the logs that are sent via a given connector?
Right. So it really depends on the connector. So for example, if we're ingesting Office 365 logs, it's just a matter of checking that box. Office 365 logs are free to ingest, so you can ingest those as much as you want. You won't pay a penny. For other data sources, we have more granular control of what we want to ingest. So we can say, let's just say we have a service or an application that we use, and that connector is not built in. It's not part of this list here. We can create a playbook or a logic app that connects to that service and extracts specific attributes out of that service. So if I want to just pick up the timestamp, the username, the IP address, the actions taken, I can specify those within my logic app and say, I just want to ingest those logs. While others, for example, Defender and Preview, Microsoft 365 Defender, this encompasses Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Identity, Defender for Office 365, and Cloud App Security. So rather than me connecting a single log source, and if I connect Defender for Office 365, it's only going to generate alerts from Office 365. But with this connector that's been in preview for a little bit now, I can actually select the types of logs that I want to ingest. So if I'm looking at Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, which is the EDR solution for Microsoft, I can say I want to ingest device info, device file events, and that's about it. I don't necessarily want all this information because it's just going to be noise for me. Same thing for the other products. I can selectively select whichever types of log I want, and then ingest those into the product rather than ingest all the logs and have it just retain there and cost me money for no reason. Same thing from your servers on-prem. If you have your servers, or not just on-prem, wherever your servers reside, it would use the security events connector. So that means it's going to connect to your event log. It's going to capture specific information from your event log. And this is based on an agent that gets deployed on your server. And I can select, do I want minimal events, common events, or all the events happening on the server? And I can even dig through that even deeper and select custom logs within my server infrastructure, my server or workstation infrastructure. So under Windows event logs, I can add a specific table or event from happening. I can add the error, warning information, and all that would then get ingested depending on the logs that I get on the server or service. You said you had another question there, Betty?
Yes, the last part of Mike's question, you've talked a little bit about this, is are there periodic recommendations for logs that should be added or removed to provide more value?
Yes. So once we ingest the logs, depending on what it is, so for the common logs, Office 365, Azure, servers, infrastructure, firewalls, because we already have that level of expertise ingesting those logs, we already know what logs we need or what pieces of the logs that we need. We might not necessarily need everything from our firewall, so we can select the types of logs that we want to ingest, and then based on that, we can query them and see, do we actually need this log or this table? If not, we can easily remove it. Otherwise, if it's a brand new product, we don't know anything about it, we have to see what logs are being ingested. So it's just a matter of coming in here, selecting the type of log that we want to use. Let's just say Azure Activity. So think of this as one of your third-party applications, maybe Salesforce. We'll ingest as many logs as possible to see the properties that we get. And based on that, maybe I can say, I don't want the subscription ID or correlation ID. And part of that, I can take it off out of my logic app or out of my connector and not ingest those logs because they're just going to cost me money to store them there. So I only want the relevant logs, and I don't want any logs that are just going to cost me money to store without having any value to them. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, we also have some other questions.
Sure.
So from Nick, he says, I was just curious if you also had to pay for Azure Log Analytics consumption fees to utilize Sentinel.
Yes. So because Sentinel sits on top of Log Analytics, the consumption fees for Log Analytics apply, as well as Azure Sentinel to ingest those logs and to analyze them within the product. So you'd have to calculate the cost of storing them in Sentinel or analyzing them within Sentinel, as well as storing them and analyzing them within the Log Analytics workspace.
Okay, and Mifrah was kind enough to send a graphic showing which logs are free to ingest.
Yeah, so thank you, Mifrah, for that. Basically, just high level, Office 365, Azure Activity, those are free to ingest. Alerts from the Microsoft 365 Defender products are also free to ingest. And there are a couple others, I just can't get them off the top of my head right now, but I'm sure you can see them in the table that was shared with you. Thank you for that.
And we have a question from Levante. Do you
Sure.
support Cisco eStreamer? I could only find an older white paper.
Let's take a look. I did find eStreamer, I think it was Firepower in this case, but let me see. Yep, so Cisco Firepower is part of this. It is still in preview mode. We actually do have one of our customers that we are working with to get this set up, but it is in a connector. And Cisco does provide the documentation on how to connect this connector. So typically what happens for firewalls is that we would need either a common event format or a syslog server. Usually it's Linux in your environment that this firewall can communicate with. It would forward those syslogs over to that Linux server, which would then parse them and send them over to Logs Analytics Workspace. And that's how we would get those logs into Sentinel. So it's just an extra step. We would have to have that Linux server present wherever those firewalls are. It can forward on port 514, and then from there, it would send those logs over to the Log Analytics workspace. So Cisco Firepower eStreamer is here, and it is in preview mode.
Okay, we have a further question from Nick.
Yes, sure.
SIEMs typically require significant care and feeding to ensure you get value from them. Is Sentinel a solution that can be leveraged by smaller organizations that may not have a dedicated resource for managing Sentinel?
So I want to say you're right. It does take effort to manage and maintain. For smaller organizations, they might not have a lot of data sources to ingest. So technically speaking, if they just have Office 365 and Azure, you might, not end up spending any money to ingest those logs. But from a maintenance perspective, the built-in rules that Microsoft provides are more than enough to start within your environment. And as you get more familiar with Custo Query, because that's the language that it uses, you'll be able to custom create your own rules, and then very few management would be required from your end after the fact. But as long as you understand the Custo Query language and you know how it works and what it means, the product does the work on its own. So for smaller organizations, you would still need a dedicated resource just in order to make sure that you're on top of all the alerts that pop through, especially the high severity ones, because that could mean that someone was compromised or someone does have a ransomware or a ransomware attack was triggered. So you want to be on top of that as quickly as possible. That's why I would recommend a SOC service or a security operations center, which is the Alarm Guardian offering that we are providing. It regardless of the size of your organization, small, medium, large, there will be some sort of service that we can offer to help you, um, mitigate that risk in your environment. We have a whole team of 24/7 security analyst professionals that deal with this on a daily basis. So I would recommend we go through that method if you don't have the manpower to do it internally.
Kelvin had a comment. He just said new logs are always being added. And then we have a question from Jerry.
Sure.
What are Azure Sentinel's strong differentiators versus other SIEM? Example, Logarithm or Exabeam?
So one of the pros of Azure Sentinel, especially for people that have already invested in the Microsoft ecosystem, is that what works better with Microsoft than other Microsoft products. So easily integrate with Microsoft products. This is a cloud native solution, so you don't have to build any servers, you don't have to build any on-prem infrastructure in order to get this up and running. It's as simple as getting an Azure subscription, which is free, and building the log analytics workspace, building the Sentinel environment, and that sits on top of uh, your Azure subscription. So everything is cloud native. On top of that, other SIEMs don't provide automation. They don't provide the ability, the SOAR component of this product, which is to automate a response whenever an attack happens. Whether that is just to alert you or whether that is to provide you with options in an email. So I can have it send me an email and tell me, is this user compromised? Click on compromised user. Uh, another button that says notify the customer. Another button that says close ticket, it's a false positive. So we can automate that response and have not just AI drive whether it's real or not, but us as security analysts to click on a button and immediately close a ticket or remediate a ticket in no time compared to other SIM products or other SOC solutions where they would have to custom build their source solution outside of their SIM product. And it might not even be all compatible together. And one more thing to add is that Microsoft is investing over $1 billion in security per year. So now they're not just a technology company, they're also a security company. And you can bet that they will keep enhancing their security products throughout the times with the amount of investment they are putting into this product as well as other security products that Microsoft has to offer.
I think we're good for now. We're a little bit past time. Thank you all for your attention. Would you like to make any final comments, George?
Sure. So again, reach out to us at cloud@proserveit.com for any questions that you might have. If you want us to further, have this conversation and figure out what fits best for your environment. If you want more information about our SOC service, reach out to us and we'll be glad to assist you there.
And Mifrah just posted a Microsoft customer story. Government of Nunavut comes back stronger after ransomware attack with Microsoft Security Solutions. So feel free to access that in our chat.
Perfect. And I just added also the pricing of Azure Sentinel so that you're aware of the cost associated to various data centers. Part of our scoping call as well is to go through an estimate or a calculator to figure out what sources you have, what is the average amount of data we see coming in from those sources so that we can kind of project what your estimates are going to be. There are also workbooks, by the way, to show us the estimate once we ingest those logs. But what I'm talking about are pre-ingestion activities, just kind of an estimate of, hey, we have 10 firewalls, 15 servers, 100 users. What are our logs going to look like? We'll put that in the calculator, and then we can provide you with an estimate of what it costs you to ingest a Sentinel to Logs Analytics workspace, and if you want to store those logs for longer than 90 days. Reach out to us, and we'll be glad to assist you there as well.
And as I mentioned before, we will be sending you a recording of this presentation and further information in the next day or so.
Thanks, Betty. I would just like to add a couple of things. If you want to have a pilot project or a proof of concept, then please reach out to us as well. We'll be happy to get that set up. And if you want more information about Sentinel or any other resources or programs you would like to learn for training purposes as well, I will definitely love to send you more information on that. And thank you again for joining this event. We really appreciate you having you here.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.